This is Morten from Inkish. We are here at the Print Matters event in Budapest. Really nice. And I had the pleasure of talking to Charles, who is the head of and the CEO or president, whatever you call them, for the BPIF in the UK. And he has just been moderating a chat about CO2. I mean, how sexy can it be, right? Charles, good to see you.
Good to see you, Martin. A pleasure to be here again and see you again.
What is your title, actually?
I'm actually the chief executive of the BPIF.
So when I see CEO, that's just the American abbreviation for
yeah,
the same, right?
CEO is the same thing. So it means that I am responsible for everything that does or does not happen in the UK for the BPIF. Very lucky to have a fantastic team, and we cover a great deal of ground. So I'm very privileged to be in that role, and it's obviously a wonderful sector.
Agree with you, 100%. You said to me that moderating a conversation like the one you just had with a couple of people from different countries, basically 3 countries, right?
Yeah.
It requires that you really pay attention also, because one thing is that you have to, of course, ask relevant questions, but we also come with so many different backgrounds, right?
Well, I think we've just done quite a short session, half an hour, but absolutely flew past as I knew it would. We're very fortunate to have, we had a commercial printer, we had a book printer, and actually we had someone from the supply chain and the ink sector. So that was a really good cross-section. The challenge with these things is trying to sort of stay in the moment and really paying attention to the fascinating points that our panelists are making, whilst also thinking ahead about the next question. So it's an interesting thing to do. We've had a really good discussion. The topic was CO2, but actually what we talked about a lot more was generally sustainability. And not just sustainability, but sustainability in the business reality. So the ink supplier was talking about what they do and how important that is, which is fantastic, but also the commercial reality. And they made the interesting, perhaps quite harsh observation that yes, it's a really important point, but actually when it comes to supplying ink, are people going to pay more for it? Probably not. We then looked at, well, how do we keep these efforts going, and how do we keep those efforts maintained over the long term? Because there's absolutely no point in doing this thing for a year or two and then falling away. And my experience has been that recessions have hit and then it's fallen away. I think what we've seen over the last, actually maybe even 10 years, is that's less the case now. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think legislation came through very strongly today. None of us like legislation, but it came through very clearly that it is driving effort. So I suppose that's arguably a good thing. The other side is the market pull. So customers are demanding it and requiring it. But the third, and in many ways the most interesting, is that everyone very strongly feels it's just the right thing to do. And I think that when people feel that strong personal sense it's important, there is a good chance we'll keep it going. If I can say a couple more things, what I'd say also is that from a BPIF point of view, our most active group is our environmental and sustainability group. We've created a roadmap for that. And one of the things that I was very keen for us to make sure we did on that roadmap was make sure that every single action that we can suggest out to our members and to the industry is entirely consistent with running efficient businesses. Because
otherwise it doesn't really make sense, right?
It doesn't make sense. It falls away. Waste is environmentally bad in every sense. So a lot of it's about reducing time, reducing waste, reducing resource use. They're all consistent with good business.
One of the discussions that was also on stage was that if you make a book, it has a long shelf life before it becomes waste.
Yes.
Right? If you have a packaging product, it goes away in 2-3 days, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, are you sometimes annoyed because that nuance is sometimes missed in the discussion about our CO2 impact, right?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I'm probably unusual. I think these things are really important because, and packaging is a fantastic example. A lot of people talk about the need to reduce packaging, and that absolutely is important. And Thomas today made the point that one of the strongest impacts is the packaging that we don't produce. But we can all see it's more complicated than that as well, because when you look at food waste, for example, packaging has an incredibly important role to play in reducing food waste. Yeah, so it's about appropriate use of packaging in that environment, and making sure that we produce that packaging as efficiently as possible. The legislation at the moment is trying to encourage that, but certainly in the UK, EPR, extended producer responsibility, has been a real challenge, and we've all had concerns about some of that legislation driving the wrong behaviours. But I think the summary point there is it's about appropriate packaging. Books market, different but really interesting, because the scourge of the book industry over decades really has been the unsold copies. Now what's changing now is just in time has come into much greater extent.
But that is true and then not true anyway, because that is like every time I talk to people about that now print on demand will be, or just in time production will be the savior of this. But I mean, go to HP, go to Economic Malta, go to all the digital manufacturers and ask for the recipes of the inks. Be my guest. Secondly, one of the requirements for European Union is de-inking, right? See the ink discussions about HP's lack of ability to pass on that one, right? So I'm it's the same when you look at e-commerce today, where you have tons of shipments that goes forth and back. I'm just sometimes a little bit worried that in the name of consumer good and all these kinds of things, we forget that if we just create more problems for ourselves.
I think Morten, you're right. I think the unfortunate thing about life is there are not easy, quick answers to any of these issues. And so I think the point you're making now is a really interesting one. So on the one hand, we're seeing a lot less pulping of unsold copies. On the other hand, there are clearly challenges and opportunities to improve the way that just-in-time supply works. Totally agree with that.
I also agree with you that it is an opportunity, but I just think that it requires also that the OEMs start playing along with the legislation on these kind of issues with the sustainability and environmental things. Otherwise, I think that it is a deep, dark black hole that is difficult to come up of again, right? So
I think so, and I think that they recognise that it is important. I guess there are intellectual property sometimes concerns that they have around their ability to maybe go that extra mile. I think they certainly do a certain amount of effort, but perhaps they could do more.
Or imagine what happens when they realize that all the inks are the same, right? Damn it, right?
Yes. Well, ink, I don't say ink, but I think our industry has a habit of levelling playing fields competitively. But I genuinely think it's a very exciting time there. All that change. I think there are significant environmental benefits, but you've also very clearly identified some things where there are black holes, might be overstating a bit, but there are clearly some opportunities to do things better and differently. And I think one of our roles as a trade association is to be that neutral body, to get across.
So you would eventually be the body that could take that under NDAs and basically provide what is needed for legislation and keep things secret.
We don't have a commercial interest in that. What we have an interest in is promoting what is good for our industry as a whole, and that includes suppliers, includes the printers, and actually it includes getting across how outstanding print is as a channel. So that's kind of at the heart of what we do or try to do as an organisation. But it takes time and it takes trust.
I have a question, because since you left the European Union, have you in the UK changed the entire legislation, or you're still following through to most of the European?
Fascinating, interesting. We haven't changed our legislation. I think there was initially quite a strong belief that we would change our legislation, but I think the reality more often than not has been that by changing legislation we've just created more bureaucracy, because we still have to comply with a great deal of EU legislation. And actually I think it's worth again saying that to be here today with Intergraf, that we are very, very big supporters of Intergraf. We believe very strongly in what Intergraf do, and the value and benefit that we have had out of that strong connection into Intergraf and that network, but particularly into Brussels, has been incredibly important in terms of helping our members and helping our industry understand how to deal with European legislation. And that actually, I think that's probably the most practical way to answer that question. So, no, we are still complying with the legislation. What we could do as a country in the UK is make that easier. And I think we've gone in one direction, and we're coming back to say, look, we are Europe, but trading with mainland Europe is so important to us. We need to make that as frictionless as possible, and we are all working around that, and common sense is starting to come through a bit more.
That's good. Last question. Isn't it just fascinating to think of that we started talking about 4 people on a stage and we ended up talking about British legislation towards the European Union?
We end up at Brexit. We'll probably do Donald Trump next.
Thank you.
Thank you.